I know so many Commander players that have had the exact same experience where they've had one person at the table at one point in time be so distracted that it's led to an outburst of frustration. All the players have come together and say, "What are you doing? Get off your phone. Stop watching the TV. Stop watching this. Stop doing that," whatever it might be. Someone who is so distracted that it's holding back the game. I mean, especially at lower levels, Commander's games can take so long to complete anyway, like an hour plus, 2 hours plus on a game where people are constantly board wiping, removing. You're playing a bunch of decks that rely primarily on their commanders and they keep getting removed. Whatever the excuse might be, there have been games where, due to forces outside of the majority of the table's control, someone has taken too long to complete their turn. And now this could be a nuanced discussion. If it's factors outside of your control, maybe that person just needs to learn better communication skills with the person that they're texting, and maybe tell them that, like, "Hey, I'm trying to set aside an hour of my life to play a game. Maybe I should text you later, but hey, I'm not telling you how to lead a healthy communicative relationship." But when it comes to the actual gameplay, a lot of times Commander players might be confused as to how to run certain lines in a new Commander deck that they built, and that's honestly pretty valid. A lot of times people don't have the time to goldfish through their deck. They found a cool concept, they just proxied it up, they're running to their locals night or their friends kind of hosted night, and they're just thinking, "You know what, I just put this together, let's get it going." And they put aside a combo that they put together a combo that they didn't even realize was a thing. And they're like, "Wow, this is so cool. Based on you having that static effect, my cards now do this." And it's like, how do I think through this? And a lot of that stuff can lead to pretty cool moments. But I think it really is rude in a certain way to make that happen. I think it can lead to situations where one person might just tend to do things just because you can, because it's easier to make the quick decision, understanding the social nuance of what's going on, to move your turn forward faster, to not take up other people's time. It can be really frustrating when you're tapping and untapping things. You're playing the game. You got your Rube Goldberg machine going, but then your opponents are sitting there watching at your Marvel that just isn't looking as sparkly and fancy as you think it is. Now, I think this is based off of really a lot of frustrations that people have with gaming in general. I think a lot of spiky folks tend to take a lot of time, hyperthink through games. That's you have all had that D&D player or that board game player in your group that has taken forever to make a decision because they want to kind of optimize every single play. And I think that's like the big downside to a lot of Euro games out there. But specifically in today's video, I wanted to go over a video that Toor from the MTGGoldfish Commander channel made, talking about why it's rude to play too much Magic the Gathering in Commander. And that's specifically around the fact of taking your turns too long, whether that be you're distracted, which I'm not sure if that's what they're talking about, or if it's specifically around sequencing a bunch of spells together. Based on the thumbnail, it seems to be more so about the gameplay side of things. So let's hop right into the video and really see what Toor's got to say about taking forever to play the damn game. Why it's rude to play too much Magic in Commander. You know what? Just off the bat, Toor, I love me a good Commander video. I love Toor. Gotta leave this one a like. Leave a like on this video, okay? Anyway, link down below, full screen it. Let's hear it, Toor. What do you got to say?
Hey friends, it's Toor, and today I want to tell you about a problem I've had and, well, currently still have in Commander, and that is playing too much Magic in Commander. Sounds a bit weird? Let me explain. For those who don't know, I am a huge Izzet fanboy. I even busted out my Izzet.
Okay, all right. Immediately I know where this is going. This is for all this is for all of, oh, what is that experienced Commander? Is it Niv Magus? No. Oh, that experienced Commander. I imagine he might bring it up. If you know it in the comment section down below, the one where, you know, every time you cast a spell or something, you get an experience counter, and then your spells cost 1 less for each experience counter you have. It's a really dumb commander. So you tend to like play these storm decks in Izzet that take forever, where you're cantripping, adding mana, drawing, and you don't really know where you're going. And ultimately you come to a big like storm spell or an X spell, and you get like each player to draw a bunch of cards and mill out or something like that. So a lot of these Izzet decks can be really hard to construct because they tend to be like combo centric or storm centric. You have to specifically build Izzet decks in mind to be value centric, like you have to force yourself to, or they tend to be one or the other. That tends to be what the color is, especially in terms of lore, like the chaotic intellect that comes with something like being a storm deck. So I think I see where this is going already. As a Keranos player themselves who has built a higher power Keranos deck to not really rely on the commander, but just play a value is it build that just honestly just goes infinite. It's just like, a value control deck that wins with a bunch of like kind of Splinter Twin style combos. The deck has seen a lot of evolutions over the years, and I've kind of just finally landed on the fact that I'm not going to force myself to just play a worse deck. I'd rather just build it around a different commander, but I kind of see where they're going with this
video. Of course, I love everything about the color pair. Blue and red are my two favorite colors in Magic. I love the draw and control aspects of blue combined with the aggressiveness and explosiveness of red.
Yo, okay, someone let me know in the comment section down below the amount of times that I have seen Arcane Denial brought up in the general discussion around EDH. Like, this card has low-key blown up in especially the content creator discussion sphere about as an absolutely insane counterspell. I always had this in a group hug commander deck. I've never really thought about this using this in any other context whatsoever. And I guess it's like seen as like a political tool because you can get someone to draw cards, or you can counter your own spell and draw like 3 cards that way. Like, what's the hype around Arcane Denial? Like, I see it as like a popper, as a popper Turbo Fog player and as a group hug player in EDH. I get it in those contexts, but like, why does it keep getting brought up?
Red. I love the Ravnica guild that gives the color pair its name. I absolutely love Spellslinger as an archetype. I adore the guild aesthetic too, with these lightning obsessed mad scientists all around. And I'm a big dragon fanboy too, so obviously Niv Mizzet has always been one of my favorite characters in Magic. Just a big, brilliant, egotistical jerk of a dragon. Absolutely stan old Nizzy. So early on, when I first started playing Commander, one of my first decks was unsurprisingly an Izzet Spellslinger list. One person in the playgroup already had a Niv Mizzet deck, so I wanted to try something a little bit different, and luckily for me, a brand new Izzet commander was shortly previewed, Melik Izzet Paragon. And this was literally everything I could have hoped for. It is Izzet, it is Spellslinger.
I found at the time that when this card was released, right, like way back when, Commander wasn't the front-facing thing of Magic. It wasn't the front-facing format of Magic. Like, this spell was like too high cost to me. The whole like homogenization of the Commander format around like content creation and EDH rec wasn't really there. So I think the deck building and the deck building kind of milestones or the pillars that you have right now as a Commander player didn't exist back then. So this card was like really expensive to me as a Izzet commander. Like, as it wasn't a green commander, it wasn't necessarily a red commander that you could like ramp out into with like certain spells. Like, I didn't want to build a deck that way. I wanted it to be mana rocks and ramp. Like, the big spells to me were to be played by Gruul or green. Like, that was it. Like, green was the ramp color. So this was like so expensive to me. I did not have the idea of like panning out my deck with like mana rocks and everything. It's one of the things I'm really happy that like content creation and EDH rec has helped me do. It's definitely improved my deck building, but it's probably made my deck building a bit too uniform amongst all the decks I build. Different discussion matters,
and it's a weird, and I absolutely love weirds. So as soon as Melik was released, I whipped up together an Izzet Spellslinger brew around it with all of my favorite Izzet Spellslinger cards, and I brought it over to the next Commander night, and I was super pumped to start playing with it. And it performed way better than expected. I popped off and had a blast storming off, generating a ton of mana, casting mana geysers and turnabouts, drawing cards with Intellectual Offering and Compulsive Research, and dumping all that mana into an epic experiment for a dozen extra spells to cast for free, copying a bunch of instants and sorceries for free along the way, of course. All while
remembering that this works because when that trigger copies on the commander, if I can just go back here. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your library, copy it. You may choose new targets from the copy. So you may cast the top card of your library for an instant and sorcery. So what you want to do is like Brainstorm is one of your best friends here. Just being able to set up a card on top of your library. You could also do this with Jace the Mind Sculptor. I mean, there's plenty of cards that allow you to do this with like Instant Speed Scry or whatever. But when you cast that spell from the top, if you put an X spell on top, when you cast that spell, when this triggers, it sees the X value that you put on the stack. A lot of people get this confused in Commander. The X spell has the X converted mana cost added to it to its total converted mana cost. So a spell that has like X and blue and red, that is 2 CMC everywhere else except on the stack where you pay the X. So if you pay 10 into the X, that spell's converted mana cost is now like 12, so you can hit it with Disdainful Stroke. Disdainful Stroke is you can counter a target spell with CMC 4 or more. So originally you wouldn't be able to if you just paid like 1 into it. It'd be a 3 CMC spell, but then now you can Disdainful Stroke it. So this was actually really powerful. If you were to put an X spell on top, cast that, you'd get 2 copies of it, and it'd be like, as far as I'm aware, based on how I played this, you should be able to then copy it with the X equals whatever on the stack. If I've been playing that wrong, call me out, but that's how I've been playing it.
Bunch of instants and sorceries for free along the way, of course. All while my gutter snipes were burning opponents and my Talrand was making an army of drakes. It was glorious. But when I stopped looking at my own cards and my sweet board state and started looking at my opponents, I could clearly see they were long checked out of the game, clearly not having a good time. The problem was, while I was having an amazing time storming off and casting a billion different spells, my opponents literally couldn't do anything during the time that I was doing this. So they were just sitting there watching me play the game of Magic. And that's obviously not fun for your opponents. Having one person playing solitaire for like 10 minutes straight and the rest of them just being spectators of the game that they're participating in. That's not really fun. We all signed up to play Magic, not just watch one person play Magic, right? I ended up trying Melik again, and again, I stormed off and took a 10-minute turn. I didn't end up winning the game. I just fizzled out after...
That right there. This is why people hate it. This is why my man stormed off and still fizzled. No, you don't even know how mad I'd be. As someone at that table, I'd be so mad. I'd be so mad. I wouldn't, like, I don't even know. Like, it's like when you, it's like when you gotta like bring a really bad, like a really bad report card mark to your parent, and you're sitting there, you're like, you just gotta eat it. You just gotta eat it. You gotta just own up to the rest of your table and just tell them you failed. You failed. And I can't even.
Casting a bunch of spells, generating more mana, casting more spells, just not finding a finisher, and then my opponents quickly killed me. But nonetheless, I still took a 10-minute turn before dying. And when that happened, I decided I'm just going to take apart the deck. Because at the time, I figured there was no way for me to build a Melik Izzet Spellslinger deck without it being a 10-minute storm turn. So the problem I stumbled upon with Melik is a more generalized problem that I see in Casual Commander.
Okay, hold on. Before you, okay, so we're at 334. Hold on, I want to see Melik again. Hold on, what's the trigger on Melik? What's the trigger on Melik? Where is it? Okay, there it is. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may spell from it, copy it. Oh, you're forced to copy this. It's not even a may. So you may cast a card from the top. So you can make that decision, but if you cast the card from the top, you have to copy it. You have to resolve that spell. I guess that's like, cause I'm trying to think, a lot of spells now, they're kind of designed with that kind of in mind, where they don't force you to. It's like a lot of you mays, or like they'll restrict you and say once per turn. Okay, you have to copy it. Interesting. Sorry, 334 is.
It's an expectation that everybody gets a time equity. In Casual Commander, there's an expectation that everybody gets a chance to play the game. More specifically, though, everybody gets a equal share of the total collective game time when everybody's sitting down at the table together. Basically, in a 4-player game of Commander, there's an expectation that every single person has roughly a quarter of the group's collective game time to do things in the game. This isn't some hard and fast rule, by the way. This is just a general observation that most people want an equal opportunity to participate in a game of Commander. So when one person starts hogging up way more game time than everybody else at the table, either by having one really long turn, like a storm type turn, or just having every single turn being way longer than everybody else's turn, then that can start going against the expectation of having time equity, and it can lead to frustrations at the table.
So this is why we have like chess clocks in constructed, but I understand like in a casual environment, you really don't want to do this. But the reason you have this in competitive is that there is an advantage to playing more of the game, because in a 50-minute round timer for constructed, on MTGO at least, you're each given a round timer of 25 minutes. Sorry. 25 minutes that leads to 50. Now, in a paper in-person event, you are playing a shared clock. And in that case, one person can actually take advantage of this because it is more advantageous to play more of the game. You have more time to think, more time to strategize, and you limit the amount of time your opponent then has to strategize and think, which is why slow play, calling your opponent out for slow play is so important. You need to make sure you're playing an equal amount of the game. And you also need to make sure that you're managing your time well, especially you as a deck that maybe are playing control and takes longer for you to finish your games. In that case, like it's very important that you play an equal amount of the game, which is why chess timers are important, because then each player is given the same pool. You can't play 30 minutes while your opponent plays 20. You each get to play 25 and 25. So again, in person, it can be abused a bit more, but judging and the way the rules are worked around, like you can call people out for this, but on MTGO, it's just a hard rule, 25-25. There's no judges in place to kind of stop this. There's no kind of, a lot of the social element is lost. So in Commander, especially, this is important because it's not just about the competitive integrity, but it's also in the social aspect, the gathering aspect of Magic. You want to make sure that you have an equal opportunity, that all players are playing the same amount of game to enjoy that. It's not just about winning, but it's also, you want to give each player the equal amount of time to enjoy the game, to enjoy their deck, to play out their sequences, to have their big moments. And if one person is taking all that away, even if you play like 20 minutes and each person gets 5, that's great. But then if you play a 20-minute game and one person gets 10 minutes and the other players get like, whatever that amounts to for the other 3, like 3.33, whatever, that's not as fun because they feel like they haven't drawn as many cards, played as many cards, had as many big moments. So it's all
breaking
social.
Time equity is something that I know a lot of people in the community struggle with too. There are certain decks and archetypes out there that have a tendency of taking up way more time than everybody else at the table. Pretty much all Storm decks are notorious for this, as the entire point of those decks is to set up one big turn, casting a ton of spells and leading into a Storm finisher. Simply the act of casting and resolving all those spells take a while, but then add in the fact that you also have to keep track of all that floating mana, what your storm count is at, resolving all the triggered abilities that you have on board, and figuring out how to actually win at the end makes the entire thing slow and complicated for you, while your spectator opponents are bored and probably checking their phones.
Wait, sorry, what is that?
Complicated for you,
you go through Gutter Snipe, Storm Splitter. This is a new one. You cast an instant source spell, create a token that's a copy of Storm Splitter. Yo! Wait, who knew about Storm Splitter? This is from Bloomborough. Yo, wait, whenever you cast an instant source spell, create a token that's a copy of Storm Splitter, exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. It has haste. It's a 1/4. This is a 1/4. Yo, this is actually a sick card. Burgee, goated card, by the way. But
spectator opponents are bored and probably checking their phones. But it's not just Storm decks either. There are certain archetypes in Commander that are notorious for taking up more and more of the group's collective game time. Super Friends is another one. When the deck gets to do its thing and have a whole bunch of Planeswalkers, it can take a really long time to resolve each turn, since each Planeswalker has a ton.
And you know what's crazy about this? Like when they have like 3 to 4, heck, even like 5-7 planeswalkers out, like each time they activate a planeswalker, it takes forever, because the planeswalker is like, for each opponent, put 2 1/1 counters on this, you gain 2 life for each kind of, and then you're just like, let me write this stuff. It takes forever. And then based on how you sequence it, different outcomes happen. Like you may get more 1/1 counters if you do it this way, which might be beneficial, or you get less 1/1 counters, which might be beneficial to get underneath like a defensive ability. Like it's so annoying for this, and especially I imagine for the player themselves playing all these planeswalkers. If you're playing like a value friends deck, like, oh god, no, I don't want to play against it. Like I'm always gonna swing at that person, because I always need to make sure a certain amount of planeswalkers don't exist on the field so that they can just like not have this decision paralysis.
ton of text and multiple abilities that you need to choose which to use every single turn. I've had a friend who made an Atraxa Super Friends deck, and he ended up taking it apart because he just didn't like handling all those planeswalkers every single turn. The Blink archetype also has this problem. When your entire deck revolves around permanents that enter the battlefield with triggers and a bunch of ways to constantly blink and re-trigger those abilities, resolving everything can start taking a long time once you're blinking like 6 or more things per turn. Even worse is when blink decks are set up to be blinking not just on their own turn, but everybody's turn. If the blink deck assembles your...
It's like when, like, it's not that, like, at this point, like, Seedborn Muse, like, when you untap, like, it's not that it's, like, just that it's extremely powerful, but it's just like, oh, Lord, you're just gonna be doing this, doing that, like you have mana to do this, activate this, that, like it's just too your mind just
to blink their entire board on each player's end step, taking even more time on everybody's turn than even the player whose turn it actually is. And beyond certain archetypes, there's also specific commanders that have a strong tendency to break time equity. The most obvious example being Nadu, which is even incredibly boring for modern players to watch as well in 1v1, but it's also a similar story with the popular commander Flubs, which also inevitably leads to long turns when the deck starts doing its thing. It's important to note that decks can break time equity without breaking other expectations in casual commander. For example, having a deck that is way more powerful than the rest of the table, or running salty cards. Like my Melik deck, for example, it wasn't more powerful than the rest of the table, and scrolling through EDH Rec's salt page, you won't find any of those cards in my deck. The same can be said about blink decks or super friends or any deck that is hogging up too much game time. It's not necessarily about power level or about salty cards. It's more about how the deck functions as a whole. Well, except for Nadu. Nadu should never be in casual commander in my opinion. Stick that one in CDH only. It's also
what are some other, let me know in the comments, what are some other commanders that you think should not be played in casual, like below a 7 or a 6? Should not at all. Like it's just you have to purposely build a 2 power level deck or the deck is automatically like an 8. What are some other commanders? I'm really interested to hear what y'all think, because like I could think of some. There's commanders out there that are very obvious. I mean, like maybe not like Prosh. Prosh is like very much like you build food chain or the deck is like kind of whatever you want to build it to be. But there's some commanders that pretty much like if the commander is out and you don't kill it, you're pretty much losing the game, like at all times. Also, just noticing in the background with the books, shout out to these James A. Corey books here. Who knows the Expanse in the comment section down below? Put your hands up in the comments. Like shout out to a top 5 sci-fi series. James A. Corey's The Expanse series. Those are some of the best sci-fi books I have ever read. I have the whole series. It's such good sci-fi. I cannot recommend it enough. It has political intrigue. It has like it takes into part time dilation, like all that stuff. Like it's so good. Please, I cannot recommend it enough.
Incredibly easy to accidentally make a deck that hogs up all the game time. And I'm saying that from personal experience as someone who's been playing Commander for over a decade now. I mentioned that my Melik deck was my first experience bringing a solitaire deck to the table, but I actually ran into the same issue recently with my Myra the Magnificent deck. This is one of the coolest commanders that I did a Budget Brew article on 2 years ago, and my partner gifted me a version of it, which was incredibly sweet of him. It's an Izzet Spellslinger deck, which I love, but it's specifically not Storm. The deck doesn't have one big turn popping off. Instead, it's trying to, well, set up a theme park over the course of many turns, opening attractions with Myra, imprinting spells onto them, and then hoping to roll well and visit those attractions to cast even more spells. I'm not going to explain attractions here. I know the vast majority of you do not care, but I will say it's incredibly fun to pilot. It's also one of my weakest decks, which I actually find a positive attribute because most of my decks are tending to be more and more higher power, and I need to have a couple decks that are kind of lower.
And I think that's a symptom of the homogeneity of the format. Like when certain pieces become more and more accessible and certain content creators and data accretion websites will tell you to build in a certain way, power levels will tend to kind of rise. So it feels like now, especially with the increased consistency of the pre-cons these days, which leads to a lot more people buying them and playing them at this power level, you have to purposely build lower power decks. And it actually is like a deck building challenge to do so. Like, you're like, oh yeah, no, I can't put the Great Henge into this Typal deck, even though it would be absolutely bonkers. Or no, I shouldn't be playing 6 board wipes in this control deck. Maybe I shouldn't be playing control in a lower power table. Like stuff like that. Maybe I should just draw cards, play a soft protection spell here and there, and not try and put stuff on Isochron Scepters that would probably just break the game.
Power to play at lower power tables. But even though Myra isn't a Storm deck, even though it's budget and very janky, it ends up having similar pitfalls as my Melik list. Once I have mana engines online like Galzif Prismari or Inspiring Statuary to turn all my attractions into mana rocks, I can cast spells with my attractions, which will open up more attractions, make elementals of Young Pyromancer, draw cards off my Archmage Emeritus, make treasures off my Stormkiln Artist, and then keep going and going. It's simply too many game actions to resolve. And the deck never wins either, by the way. It just kind of dirtles, takes really long turns as I assemble a bigger and bigger theme park, and then eventually I just get wiped and it's incredibly hard to recover, and then I lose. So it's basically a whole lot of dirtling if I can get away with it, and then nothing. So if you, like me, have a deck that just takes too much time at the table, what can you do to solve it? Well, I have 3 solutions for you. The first thing is actually the easiest one to do and probably going to solve 99% of your issues. And that's just gold fishing your deck. Play a bunch of solitaire games with your deck But as I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes there are those situations where maybe you just threw the deck together, they just came in the mail, or you just went to the local game store to pick it up before your thing night. I mean, still, like there are certain deck builders now that allow you to simulate hands and everything, and like there's a lot of opportunities I think people have to simulate decks. And you know what? Like, I'm not going to get into the whole thing about spending your time and how much time people have, and like that's just too much of a deep discussion. But try to goldfish your deck, work through certain lines. Like, assume there's no interaction from someone. What would you generally want to do? Stuff like that. Through from start to finish, from your mulligans to playing your lands to going over your hard to do combos or interactions. The more familiar you are with your own cards and the interactions within, the faster you're going to be piloting it in a real game. It's important to know what all the cards in your deck do, but also how they commonly interact with each other. For example, if you're running tutors, being able to know which cards you want to tutor up for any given situation. This is a big one. So one thing I even recommend even further with this is have like 4 to 5 cards that you grab in any specific situation. So if artifacts or enchantments are taking away running away with the game, tutor this card. If creatures are taking over the game, tutor this card. If someone is storming away with the game, tutor this card. Like you should have this locked down. Or if I'm about to win the game, how am I winning the game? If it's like with plan A, tutor this card. If it's with plan B, tutor this card. Like stuff like that. Like you should have a branching flow chart of where you want to go. Like genuinely you should. If you are at the level where you can afford vampiric tutors into your decks, you should know how to use a vampiric tutor. You should be planning a way for this. And if you take forever to figure out your tutor target, I'm not even going to comment. If you can afford Vampiric Tutor, you can afford the time to figure out what you need a tutor for. Come on. Ahead of time will make it much easier to resolve the tutors when you're in an actual game, as opposed to just like casting a tutor and not knowing what the heck you're going to be fetching up. That can take a while to resolve. I think if you find yourself in a position like me where you really want to play a Storm deck, but you're afraid of taking up too much time at the table, gold fishing is the #1 solution to making sure that you don't actually take up that much time at the table. Since Storm is essentially a solitaire deck, you can just practice doing the solitaire thing on your own time so that you don't end up wasting your opponent's time in a real game. The second thing I would recommend, and this one is specifically towards Dirtle decks, is add more finishers to your deck. Something I see in a lot of Dirtle decks, and this is kind of like the common thread between all of them, is they're laser focused on card draw, on ramp, and interaction, and then they kind of forget to add finishers to their deck. A buddy of mine had a Brago King Eternal deck whose primary win condition was just hitting people with random ETB creatures like Mold.
Okay, no. Okay, Tomer's right on this one. This is dumb. Don't do this. What I will say with like card draw and ramp, I think that's fine because a lot of times you're thinning out your deck, you're going through a large majority of your deck, and by percentages, if you put in like 2 to 3, 4 or 5 win conditions in your deck, chances are you'll find one. So I think that's fine. I don't think you need to be adding like 10 win cons in your deck. Like if especially once you get to like higher level pods, you can just add consistency, interaction, card draw, whatever, and you will get there. A lot of the times it really depends on your commander and like your synergies and everything, but don't do this where you hit your opponent in the face with a bunch of tutus. This sucks. Don't do this. Yes, add more win conditions when it's this, but I would say what his statement was could be, it's not exactly true, but I see what he said.
Drifter and Peregrine Drake, because they get the job done eventually, so why bother running any other finishers, right? Well, Brago did win games, but each time it's because we conceded rather than actually dying to a 2/2 flyer.
See?
And the deck didn't last too long in the pod because people just didn't like playing against it. So instead of just hoping your deck will stumble into a win eventually by accident, just run some finishers to make sure you can close out the game. It could be combat damage, it could be a combo, just anything that works. Like if I could swap one card into that Brago deck, it would have been Moonshaker Cavalry, just so we can all die faster. And I know some people might think this makes the deck worse because finishers aren't usually card draw or ramp, but in reality, being arch enemy over the span of multiple
says this will make it worse?
Gives your 3 opponents a...
Like people, I don't know. Like some people like don't even understand. I've seen some real crap takes on the internet about Magic. Maybe I've made 1 or 2, but I feel like as a content creator, I've spent more time justifying it. As like an average layman in my comments or on the internet, some of y'all say some things that you don't understand the consequence of. Why would this make your deck worse? Why would adding more consistency and an actual definitive I win make the game worse? If anything, it makes it easier for you as the opponents because now you know, oh, if I stop this or if I stop card B, C, D that I know this person has, then they lose the game. They don't have any other plan. So I'll just work around that and win. I don't know. What are y'all saying?
Bigger chance to figure out a way to stop you. So instead of giving your opponents a bigger window to interact and stop you, instead just seal the deal with a finisher, and your opponents will actually thank you for it. Now, if you're already super familiar with your deck due to solitaire and lots of practice, and you made sure your deck has finishers to actually close out the game in a reasonable amount of time, and you're still not happy with how the deck performs, it's just hogging up way too much game time at the table, only then would I recommend just swapping out your commander with something that is a little bit faster. There are over 2,000 commander options at this point, so chances are there's another option out there that overlaps heavy with what your current commander is doing. So you could just try swapping out commanders while keeping as much of the 99 intact as possible and just moving your old commander into the 99 instead. In my own case with Myra, I practiced with the deck a bunch and have tried many different styles of finishers for the deck, but nothing has made me 100% happy with the results. So I've decided to switch out Myra for a different Izzet Spellslinger deck, and weirdly enough, I ended up right where I started with a brand new Melik deck that I absolutely love. This is Melik Reforged Researcher. This version of Melik is still all about Spellslinger, but unlike the original one, it's definitely...
Okay, so 3 blue 1 star Melik Reforged power itself equal to the number twice the number of instant sorcery cards in your graveyard. Doesn't count exile, which is important. The first instant sorcery spell you cast each turn. Yeah, see, this is much better. This is much better because it promotes you doing something on every turn and not just doing everything on your turn by setting up the top card. I like this. Okay. All right, Tomer, you're not a degenerate. Fine. You win.
Not Storm, since its mana
Turns
discount
out
is
you're a
only once
smart
per
player.
turn, and it's definitely not a Dirtle engine like Myra, since Melic gets huge as you fill your graveyard with instants and sorceries. So this deck's game plan is to quickly fill the graveyard with cards like Traumatize and Cut Your Losses, and immediately swing in with a lethal sized commander, or turn Melic into a game-winning burn spell with Chandra's Ignition to take everybody out all at once, or just punch people to death with Gravitic Punch. The deck still runs a lot of my favorite Spellslinger cards, like tons of flashback spells.
My OCD is just so quelled. Like, it's like, I love it. It's so calming because the amount of spells that he's listing that have 3 generic in their cost, because Melic specifically reduces it by 3. So calming that it's not just a bunch of 4s and 5s that, you know, generic cost that he's playing for value. It's just like a colors and 3. So it's beautifully removed. I don't know. Something about it.
Quiet Speculation to tutor them up. And it can also create backup beaters with
spells
like
just
Seize
ruined
the Storm, or one of my favorite pet cards, Experimental Overload, which creates my absolute favorite creature token in the game. The art on it is just stunning in foil.
That's a great
so in the end, it's kind of amazing that I end up back with a Melic Is It Spellslinger deck, but this time really far better suited to a game experience that I'm aiming for. So that's my thoughts on time equity in Commander. It's a topic that I haven't seen covered in a video before, and I know it affects a lot of different play groups, and I haven't ever heard anybody label the problem as anything, so I'm calling it time equity. Let me know if you have a better name for it, but I think that kind of sums it up decently well. Hopefully this helps some of you out if you like.
Yeah, so I think time equity is actually probably a good way to label it. I was kind of outlining the whole chess clock situation earlier, and I mean, it's a very nuanced one because I think a lot of people, like, it tends to be like outside factors. I don't know, maybe that's my personal experience, but when games take a while, it tends to be outside factors where maybe people aren't spending as long to play the game, but it's more so like, oh, some, like, you know, I'll be playing with the local game store owner that's in a smaller store, and so the owner has to kind of get up and deal, you know, work with the clients that come in, which is perfectly fine, or someone that's distracted on their phone, or again, being at an event where we're kind of gathering to watch a sports game, and kind of before the game we're playing a Commander game, and just near the end of it the game started, so people are distracted and watching it. Like, there's different like social factors like that I find, which are harder to kind of navigate. But I think in the specific case of gameplay, I think Tomer's kind of outlined it pretty well. Goldfish your deck really, and just create some branching solutions, especially with tutors. The tutors are the big one. Like, know what you're winning. Know what you're like trying to get. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of players will build newer decks and they forget what they put in them. So this is kind of like a nuanced one as well, where I feel like you should know, again, if artifacts are taking over the game, I'm drawing a bunch of cards and people are like, I don't know what I'm drawing for, but like, okay, what are you drawing for, right? Like really, what do you have? Like, you are playing Rakdos. Do you actually have a way to deal with the Enchantress deck? Like, be for real. Like, I'm being so honest. Like, okay, Rakdos players, how do you deal with an Enchantress deck? I'm actually curious. I'm actually curious. How do you deal with that, right? Like, because I had situations like that where I look at specific color pairings and I'm like, how do you actually deal with this? You're like drawing a bunch of cards, you're exiling a bunch of cards on top of your library, doing all this. How do you actually deal with this? Don't just keep doing what you're doing. Can we just concede and move to the next game? I don't know. Maybe it's things like that. But I think Tomer outlined the situation pretty well. I like the video. But you know, maybe it's rude, maybe it's not. I'm not sure if I exactly agree with that, but the titling is probably just for, you know, the kind of content creation algorithm. You got to put a little hate in there, draw people in. Like, I get that. As a content creator, I get it. But in general, I think you outlined it pretty well. I'm happy you came up with some solutions. But Tomer, overall, great video.